So technically, you are in the wrong, aren't you? You. Me? I don't think so. You. Okay, so what are you gonna do? Oh yeah. Crash a bang a boomer with a great big smile and a fun taste too. Oh yeah.
And for another round of guess what we were just talking about.
Yeah,
You
right.
get to join. What we're doing is actually in the tradition of the ancient Greek epics.
Yeah.
We're starting in medias res. You
Mm-hmm.
get to join in once things have already been going on.
Sure.
So as you were saying,
Well, as I was saying, we're mentioning the sense of identity there and the difference between Italian identity and Polish identity, and how Poland is like almost crafting, as we speak, crafting a national identity, whereas Italian identity is plummeted. And
mhm,
many Italians think they live in a turd hole, And I was just commenting that I've seen this in the last 10 years for sure, but maybe as far back as the 70s, this undercutting of the American identity, almost a conscious undercutting of the American identity, so that the idea
mm,
of being American, which used to be an idea of progress and rugged individualism and creation and all this stuff, um, really it's hard to find, except for in the Midwest, really. Everybody on both sides of the country seem to think that America is the bad guy. America is awful. America is a terrorist nation. All this kind of stuff, or everything's hypocritical. Blah blah blah. So
mhm.
it's interesting to perceive that. I'm reading a book right now by Rodney Stark, just about to finish it, about how the West won. Very very.
Okay.
But he points out that America did these amazing building projects back at the beginning of the century. Incredible building projects, bridges,
That's true.
canals, and railroad systems and road systems. Just amazing stuff. And then all of a sudden, we kind of petered out. And why? It's a big question for me.
I think it's an interesting question because you're coming from over here, being on this side. A lot of what you said about the impression of America, it's that most
Yes,
people around the world would agree with that because that's been their experience for the last half century.
but let me clarify something too. Um, I think that the vision of America has been promulgated abroad as well as domestic. And I don't think it's without founding, because I think that there has been this, not just a moral decline or a sense of a lack of identity, but I really think there's been an attempt on the part of certain individuals that run the joint
Mhm.
to become the bully boy, to become the
Well, I think, and I think that's what's it is the story is plausible for Americans and non-Americans to swallow because it's also true after a certain point in history.
yeah.
And so I don't think it's so much merely that that impression is fabricated, although I think there is a significant change. I think this might be what's different between, let's say, the 1970s, 80s, and the last decade now, is that Americans are actively being told, you're the bad guys, you are worthless, etc. American peoples, which is different than the state of Uncle Sam, who is a terrorist state. I will just out and say that. The United States government is a terrorist entity, and I live in an occupied country right now. Has been occupied since World War II, came in as liberators, but still keeps the country down from developing
And I
for
think that,
strategic reasons. And I'll say
yeah,
nothing about my friends in Palestine and Lebanon.
right.
But
I think there's a lot of
but
America that would agree with that.
yeah, and I think that's when did this start to happen? Around the same time that America stopped doing some of those big building projects. So
Yeah.
you were just saying, like, beginning of the century, nobody had a problem with the states. They weren't sure necessarily was always going to be there. Maybe England does another retake scenario, 1812 again. Who knows? But things are kind of going pretty developed in the late 1900s, early 20th century. You've got it's still, quote, the land of opportunity.
Right.
And like you said, there's a lot of infrastructure projects investing in the right kinds of things in terms of culture, heritage, building up things. Um, when did that stop? But that stopped when America decided to start being the bully and start kicking people around.
And here's the thing that I think is happening now, maybe it wasn't happening even 10 years ago, is that there are almost like two Americas.
Yeah, it's
There's
interesting. Yeah.
group of people in America, myself included, who still see this land of opportunity and this vision of freedom and the economic strength and the goodwill that so many Americans have, and the principles that was founded, all this stuff that really is quite noble, it's quite virtuous. And then there's another America, if you will, that sees every other part of the world as an opportunity for rape, and pillage,
Yeah.
mayhem. And I think that the group should go the other way. I think the group here on the right-hand side is really very angered now at what has been happening with this other group and how this other group has been treating everybody else. Right after World War II, my understanding is that most of the countries in Europe were just very, very pro-American because of what had happened during liberation from fascism and all that sort of thing.
Right.
And it was not within, I would say, even 5-10 years after that suddenly things turned sour. But of course, that's when the Cold War started too, right? And that's when a certain group decided that they had to take matters in their own hands in order to win this Cold War and overthrow certain countries and assassinate certain individuals that needed assassination, et cetera, et cetera.
In many countries. Yeah.
Yeah.
From Ireland to Sicily. Yeah.
So I can't. I'm doing a series right now on the Fabian Society in England, and learning so much that I just never knew about before. And that group, especially that group in America, began its ascendancy in the 1880s, but really took off around 1930, 1920, 1930, and became.
And what is that?
The Fabians. See, that's the interesting thing. I don't think most people know who these people are, and they don't want you to know. That's odd. What we talk about when we talk about the New World Order, or we talk about the Illuminati, or we talk about the Masons, that's the Fabian Society. It's all the same group. So technically it was a group of intellectuals, socialists, by the way, socialist intellectuals, who rose to power sometime in the 1910s, 1920s. And they included people like H.G. Wells and George Orwell and Aldous Huxley and several other, and Margaret Sanger, Woodrow Wilson was a member. So you have all these different people that were really big names in this group because it was the most elite of the society, both the elite wealthy and the elite intellectual, and elite business, powerful, rich, And they decided that socialism was going to be brought about not by violent revolution, as Lenin was trying to do, but it was going to be brought about by infiltrating all the different cultural nodes, the centers of the cultures, and then inculcating socialist ideals through those nodes into the populace so that people could be governed for their own good, the way that they should be governed. And that means culling the lesser races, purifying the race through eugenics, making the economy run smoothly, all that. So that we're moving towards an Edward Bellamy utopia of communism. Right? And James Lindsay has said that communism is the paradise. Socialism is the means to that paradise.
So this is building on the Saint-Simon kind of approach, this utopian socialism. But also then, which is building this, people need to be governed for their own good. That's just a recap. That's the sequel to the original Masonry movement in the early 1700s to institute these enlightened despot type governments where the monarch becomes the sole wielder of absolute authority, be that the monarch of a newly invented nation state or the monarch of the Church of Rome, is this beam of absolute power over the people under their governance.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's in I think most people, especially living in, say, modern republics across the Atlantic, on your side of the Atlantic, are not aware of the fact that that is in absolute contraposition to traditional monarchies, principalities, traditional republics, traditional states prior to the modern period, that are much more organic, relationship-based society, where the monarch, was, the king, emperor, was not wielder of sole and absolute authority.
Well, one of the absolutely, you're absolutely right, and I think that one of the things one realizes about the Fabians, the more you study them, is that they are a quasi-religious group. You know, they saw what they were doing as religion. They used religious. They talked religiously. Their idea was that the ruler of the world, which is their term, they wanted a
I've
ruler.
heard that before. Anyway.
The ruler of the world was going to be kind of like a king pope.
Hmm.
That's what they wanted. But he would be drawn from the classes of, on the one hand, the right genetic stock,
Hmm.
high intellectualism, wealth, and noble ideals.
Hmm.
That's that. It's a philosopher king in another way, but it really kind of warped vision of the philosopher king. So, for instance, like when Mr. Adolf rises to power there in Germany, sometime in
Hmm.
part of why he rises to power is because this group of intellectuals was promoting the rise to power of a strong, charismatic, eugenicist man of the right stock, and so it's almost like the philosophy that was being inculcated had already somewhat taken root, even in Germany, and they were here's the guy, here's a guy, and they were able to
Hmm.
promote him, or he promoted himself. He was not a lone operator, that's for sure. He was connected to this Fabian society. One of the members of the Fabian society, I found this out, was actually the chosen successor of Madame Blavatsky. You know who that is?
That sounds familiar, but I couldn't.
Blavatsky was the spiritualist who led the spiritualism
Oh,
movement
sure.
at the beginning of the century that deeply influenced the Nazi Party.
Yeah,
Goebbels,
yeah.
Himmler, Hitler, all of
Right.
them were part of that. And so
Hmm.
she was in direct contact with Mr. Adolf. I mean, like
Hmm.
having parties with him, not just corresponding or anything, but he was in direct contact with her. He was in direct contact with Margaret Sanger, strangely enough, and admired her work.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
so it's
Sounds
pretty
strange
out.
at all.
So it's pretty. Mr. Hitler was he was if not a Fabian, he was very influenced by them. So, and their
Hmm.
reach is extensive. I mean, they had infiltration, if you will, or influence over England and over France and over Germany and over America, over Canada. So that all these different countries were being infiltrated by Fabians, and it's hard to use the language because you say infiltrated, you get these like cloaked individuals who are getting in there all secret. Like, no, it's just you had a really intelligent guy who was like the head of Harvard or whatever it was, and people looked up to him and they respected him. And so he told them from on high, he would look down from Orthanc and he would tell them, this is how you should operate, this is how you should work. His glossolalia was so good that everybody would be like, oh, you're so wonderful, George Bernard Shaw. Tell us more, please. Tell us more how we should live. And George
Hmm.
Shaw would say, Dominus omnes, shitheads, go do what I tell you. And that's
Hmm.
how it would work. It's really it's intriguing to me because I see so much of well, I see repeats, right? Of the
Hmm.
history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes or echoes. But I
Hmm.
also see so much more of the literature of the period being a constant conversation with this. So, for instance, like Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World, he was a Fabian. His brother was deep in the Fabians. And apparently,
Hmm.
Huxley, it is theorized, he actually broke with the Fabians. He saw their stuff as being BS, lethal, deadly. And he goes and he writes this novel, Brave New World, which now the discussion is Brave New World a condemnation of the Fabian principles, or is it a piece of art to inculcate the ideas of the Fabians? Right. George Orwell's 1984 was definitely about fascism, but it was about Fabian fascism because Orwell also saw something horrible happening, especially after he found out about the Holodomor that had occurred.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
his experience in the Spanish Civil War showed him that the whole fascist thing, which was based in the Fabian principles, and its clash with the communists was spelling really real difficulties in the future. And of course, the Spanish Civil War was a sort of a prelude to the great cataclysm that was going to occur afterwards in World War II. But he then, when he found out about the Holodomor, by secret, that is, I mean, people coming out of the Ukraine telling him this is happening. You know, we survived this. We barely got out. And one journalist in particular who went over there, snuck into Ukraine, saw what was happening, came out, wrote his thing. Nobody would believe him. Nobody would publish it. Why? Because what was happening in the Soviet Union was something like the paragon of what the socialist thing was going to be. How could it go wrong? It was beautiful, right? I mean, people like Charles Lindbergh had said this is good stuff, you know, and so everybody was like, yay, the Soviet Union, nothing could go wrong. And Stalin's like, no, nothing is wrong. We are fine. Look at all our grain. You know, and of course, people believed what they wanted to believe. And so when this one journalist snuck out with his full story, the report of people eating each other, you know, eating dirt to survive, nobody would believe him. And he contacted Orwell, and Orwell read the whole thing, and he was absolutely jaw-dropped. He could not get his mind around it. But the more he looked into it, the more he found it was true. And so he said, something's really wrong. And he began looking at his own principles, and that's when he decided that he had to write something contra to not just communism, but Fabian socialism. And that's where 1984 got its genesis. I mean, that's like, that puts the whole context of things and in, you know, shifts the context of things.
Yeah.
And, you know, we talked last time about a counter spell that Tolkien was. Now, I don't think that the old man was, I don't think he was sitting there, I got to write something against Fabian socialism. You know, I don't think he was thinking that way. But I see so much of what happens in his works as being in a narrative, we could say, with the overwhelming principles of the 20th century in Fabian society. Lewis, Belloc, Chesterton all wrote against the Fabians directly, like essays directly against the Fabian society. And so Tolkien wasn't just sitting there being like, Fabians? I have no idea what that is. You know, he obviously knew what they were, knew their principles, saw what they were doing. He ran in those circles. So I can't imagine that he would be writing his stuff without at least some sense of response to this Fabian thing that was going on.
Right. But rather than engaging in essayism, he simply begins, like Gandalf, goes back and sits in the corner and weaves a spell, contrary to the Balrog.
Exactly. But this is really intriguing because I don't know if you just looked this up or not, but when you look up the Fabians, it just, first off, they're named after a Roman general who was fighting against Hannibal, and why isn't my internet working? His suggestion was that we don't fight Hannibal in a direct battle, that we constantly retreat. And his constant retreating became sort of the principle of the Fabian society. Never directly confront your enemies. Just constantly retreat, look like you're decent and doing noble stuff, but in actuality, you're fighting from a different angle. You're retreating and fighting from a different angle. But their symbol of their of their society. Did you see this? This is class.
No.
Let me show you this. This is the symbol of the Fabians society. Here it is.
Are you intending to share your screen?
Yep.
Oh, okay, there it is.
That's their coat of arms.
I'm looking at a wolf in sheep's clothing, it looks like.
Right on.
Okay. I don't know.
Fabian society. Wolf in sheep's clothing. That's the Fabian.
They probably need a new graphic designer.
Yeah, well, you know, early 20th century, they're all ignorant cusses back then. So
that's right. Middle Ages, basically.
Yeah. I mean, this just says volumes about these guys, that they appeared to be innocent and decent and noble all the time, proposing things that were what they thought were dangerous or difficult. Or it wasn't Bernard Shaw, it was the intellectual, I forgot his name, the one that seduced T.S. Eliot's wife, but I can't remember his name suddenly. But he said basically that what we have to do, this is not his own words, what we have to do in order to perfect society is so horrific that we cannot tell anybody about it directly. And so we constantly have to call things by another name, euphemisms. And one of his major principles was never call socialism socialism. Call it something else, always. So progressivism, DEIism, wokeism, whatever you want to call it, but don't call it socialism. And these folks then ran silent and ran deep. I would probably say they were roughly around the 1880s, because they do put their roots with Emerson and Thoreau. Apparently.
Sure. That makes sense.
And the principles of Emerson and Thoreau led to a group of people that call themselves something like the good, not the Good Society. That's Grace Slick and the Jefferson Airplane, but it was like the good people, the good family, something like that. And that group then morphed into the Fabians sometime around the 1880s. And so by the time you get to H.G. Wells writing in the 1930s, his Open Conspiracy, you're getting people who have been, born into the Fabian cult. It's like being born into Dianetics, and it's just the way we do things. And
it's interesting.
Yeah, the last thing they haven't gone away. They haven't gone away. That's the last thing.
Yeah, no, of course not. And I think that's obvious more today than ever. Another interesting person you might bring in to sort of the field of interlocutors around that as an opponent of this, right alongside Tolkien, would be Christopher Dawson, British historian and author. Some things he addresses very specifically against the socialists and the Saint-Simon type socialism, utopian socialism, which is to say, these guys, right? Without saying these guys, because if you're not going to call a spade, I'm not going to call a spade either. We'll just talk about the thing in the corner.
The they.
Yeah, the they. But he goes at it from a, obviously historical angle. He writes extensively about, here's actually what history looks like. Here's in some ways, I don't say the real story of history. He's not so polemical as that. It's just, I'm going to write history in a way that at least documents some facts that are as being erased in terms of how was society structured? What did people think? What did they write about? What's in their own words? Were things actually as, designed the way that they are? And you're writing against multiple opponents at this point, whether it's the Fabians or the Leninists, right? Who are seeking to rewrite history as well. Say, no, class warfare was always the thing. People always are economically interested. I should say, by the way, and they're all members of the same thing, because I think if we look at it, Fabian society isn't something that just came into being. It's an offshoot of the same thing that Lenin comes off of, right? They're opposing parties. They're the big Endians and the little Endians arguing over about how you're going to take over the world and destroy humanity.
Right.
Well, that's to say, also includes people like Keynes, right? Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, Keynesianism, economics, and all this. And then the whole, all the people of that sort of particular economist type stripe, say more liberal, and I don't mean that in the way that Americans typically mean the word today. I mean liberal in the classical sense, and others of that. In any case, and Dawson is one of the things Dawson writes about extensively in some of his more pointed essays, is that the modern capitalist and the modern Bolshevik, and as well as the utopian socialists over there in the corner, we don't need to say who they are. They're all operating with the same fundamental principle, and that man is essentially homo economicus, first and foremost and only.
Yeah.
And he says it's simply not true.
That reflects the comment, I think, that I forget whether it was JP2 made this comment, but when asked, the Pope was asked, what's the problem with communism? And he said materialism. And then he was asked, what's the problem with the capitalism? Materialism. It's the same thing. It's the human beings are, as you said, homo economicus, that we are basically we are a little economy waiting to be pillaged or used.
And that we're fundamentally oriented around economic, that is to say, financial gain and loss motives. And we're simply not.
Yeah, I think
that's not how human beings behave.
Yeah, I think he's right on that score. One of the interesting things to me about this whole study is that we call, we use the terminology of leftist or liberal and conservative, but it really isn't. That really isn't terribly accurate, because both people on the left and on the right are seen by this group of people, the Fabians, as
members of this group of people.
They are as resources waiting to be stored up to be used later on.
Exactly.
So when it comes down to it, we're in the same boat, so to speak. We're dealing with the same issue, which is whether or not we believe that human beings are created for a higher purpose in the vision and greatness of God, or whether human beings are simply a material creature to be culled and eugenicized and perfected by the experts who know better than we do. That is, to me, a very stark contrast. But by the way, I'm not trying to guide the conversation, but it leads almost directly into one of the major things I want to talk about today with you. And I want to pull this up just because I want to remember it. One of the major things was this article by Spencer Clavin, which I don't know if you got a chance to read it or not, but it's a great article. Okay, Spencer Clavin's a wonderful essayist, I think, and he speaks on the American mind. He's about part of the what is that group called? The Center for the American Experiment, I think it's called. But anyway, Clavin writes in this essay, it's a medium-sized essay, about the phenomenon recently of flipping the bad guy to become the good guy. You know, we talk about cultural identity and the loss of cultural identity. This fits like directly into it, because I am really of the opinion that the whole loss of cultural identity is a calculated thing, that it's actually been orchestrated. It's not accidental. It's not like, oh, you get a bunch of dummies together, they don't know how to write, and therefore we get garbage. I think it's a calculated event to undermine the sense of identity, the original identity of America, and probably of Italy and other places, so that they no longer have the strength to be able to stand up for the principles that make human culture thrive. That's my opinion. But in this, Spencer Clavin is writing about how we have seen so many cultural things recently where the bad guy becomes the good. So like in the movie Wicked, right? The Wicked Witch of the West becomes the protagonist. She is the good guy, and the Wizard of Oz is the bad guy, as is to some degree Glinda until she converts. And you see that in other things as well. There's been a huge attempt to make the Harry Potter thing into this this bête noire, you know, and the attacks against J.K. Rowling for her personal comments have been very, very severe. There was, of course, the flipping of Professor Tolkien's work that occurred there at Amazon. There was destruction of the Marvel characters, and there was the destruction of Star Wars and all that. And I don't think that it's accidental that all these really, I mean, these are monumental works of art. Whatever we think of pop culture, these are monumental works of art that influence thousands of people in a positive way. And what happens? They've all been cut off at the knees, to use the Battle of Cumae image, right? They've all been cut off at the knees. This article, I think, is wonderful because it kind of outlines that, what's going on, right? I'm just going to read the opening and the ending. It gives me no pleasure to say this, but Wicked and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. I'm afraid we have to talk about it because there are orc babies now in Rings of Power, and it's Gregory Maguire's fault. Things are clearly getting out of hand. So it sounds like hyperbole, but I agree with him. I think that this flipping of the bad guy to become the good guy is a disaster. If you're going to base your race, your culture, whatever, on this image, on this mythology, you're suicidal. And I'm going to skip to the end here because there's a lot in here. He has a lot of good links and a lot of good images, but this is an interesting thing that he says at the end. To be the Lord of the Rings, the story has to include the existence of characters who have fallen into a recognizable but nonetheless avoidable error with catastrophic results. Stories that portray such errors and people making them aren't small-minded or hard-hearted. They're honest. The misunderstood villain trope is ostensibly just about showing that one character isn't as evil as we thought, but the implication is that no one is evil. Not really. And much as I wish it were so, it just ain't. What do you think of all that? What do you think of all that? No, maybe not the article, but the whole principle.
Yeah, the whole principle, which you're saying, and we see, I've been picking up, trying to find books for my children. And I'm looking back to the books that I remember seeing. Maybe I read, I saw around, maybe when I was in middle school, like Scholastic book sales, right? This organization would go around, commies, all of them, Clifford, the communist canine, whatever. I
That's
kid about that. I kid. But it's true. But it's just funny when it comes to Clifford. Like you couldn't be more obvious, right? This is the big red, dog. And it's cute. Like, yeah. But you actually realize that Scholastic had a program. They were pushing people like what's his name? It's not Terry Pratchett, is it? I don't know who it was. Who's this Golden Compass author?
yeah, right. His mortal materials or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Let's have a perverted ex-nun corrupt these two children. She'll be the good guy, right? And then he's writing novels to do for satanic atheism what C.S.
Hmm.
Lewis did for evangelical Christianity or something. Like that
Yeah.
was his objective, like explicitly. That's what he said he was out to do. There's those books. Like I knew those were crap back then. There's all these other ones like Magic Treehouse type of stories, and it's okay, man, reading these things. And you know what? You know who the good guy? Who's the protagonist? Who's the good guy? Morgan Le Fay. And it's that bumbling fool Merlin and that uptight Arthur. Those guys are just the problems, and they're knights, and if only I could guide them. And that's why she wants to put together a nice big library and lead humanity in the right direction. It's just going back to that. I don't know what that puts it at, early 90s, late 80s, something like that. But there's a lot of these things were already there of this kind of trend. Let's the misunderstood villain trope has roots that go back. That's not long. And so, again, framing my scope of reference, and I know your scope of reference, so we can spend days and look at nothing more recent than the 13th century. So, when we talk about deep roots, something's been in place for a long time, like a relative, I suppose. But this isn't just something that we woke up yesterday with. I mean, even
Right.
Wicked goes back 20 years almost. If not, I don't know what year it is now. Yeah, 20 years. Um, Evidently, time flies.
I
But
guess.
this goes back at least to the 80s. The misunderstood. And you see there's early amateur attempts at it, even going back into the I don't know, somewhere around the 1930s, more or less, for some reason. But yeah, no, I think that's absolutely the case. There was a comment I wanted to catch up on, or to follow up on. You talk about all this, and this is a way, and I know because I know in certain countries, you mentioned things like certain societies or Masons or something like, oh, you conspiracy, they're weirdo. Put your tinfoil hat back on. But it was saying in Europe and especially in Italy, we all know like this is serious historiography of recognizing that there are these groups that the various Freemason societies, very specific lodges, or have been since in the immediate pre-Risorgimento period, and actively still are active political players in
Yeah.
in the construction, in the politics and governance of the country. And there are people for and against them, and for the most part, essentially, it's different flavors of the same arch society, the same broad family of organizations, um, just differing opinions on how the pie should be carved up, how they should fleece the sheep, but they're all in the same kind of project. I mean Garibaldi and Victor Emmanuel butted
Yeah.
heads over when exactly they should attack the Pope. You know, but like ultimately they had the same goal, right? This was the so-called unification of Italy, the eradication of everything else. But I wanted to say that this was expressly and is written down, documented. The express aim of the unification of Italy was not. I mean, a lot of people agreed that yeah, hey, to compete in the modern world, we should be the different states should come together on a unified state of some sort or another. Different ways of how to look out. Not everybody, but a lot of people. But the particular group that took over Italy had as its what we now call Italy. That is to say, all these different kingdoms and duchies and republics and states that form what is now the Republic of Italy. Um, the express aim was to get rid of old Italy and old Italians, and we need to create new Italians so
That's
that when they finish the conquest, and remember that Garibaldi's a guy who makes General Sherman look like Mother Teresa. Okay. So um you're not good, right? And so they once they kind of come together, one of the famous quotes is like, "All right, we've made Italy the state. Now we just need to make Italians," which is to say, now we forced this on all of these people. There's no resistance. Some of them are for us because of the propaganda, the message, lack of anything better at this point. But now we need to convert them, and they use this express religious terminology, right? We're like Elijah trying to kill. We have to slay the prophets of Baal. That is to say, the traditional religion, the traditional organization of society, and reinstate a new enlightened society to fit our new state that we've met.
The whole getting rid of the old and exalting the young, you see it in a bald-faced way in Mao's Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution.
And that's no different than what they did here in the 1860s.
It's no different, right? Exactly. And I know James Lindsay points this out a couple times, that this is an MO of this group, is that they are frequently eradicating the older things, except for themselves, and appealing to or brainwashing, whatever it is, the Utes.
Which is how the French Revolution succeeded.
Good point. Yeah, you don't see, that famous picture of the woman leading the troops forward, and she's bare-breasted and all this. She's not an hag, right?
Well, true. And technically that's the July Revolution. That's sometime later, but yeah, after the Bourbon Restoration. But yeah, that's the common image.
This is an interesting paragraph here that I also wanted to highlight. This is the paragraph. The problem in the streaming version isn't that the orcs reproduce, which Tolkien indicated was possible. It's that they seem to just want peace, which would make them not orcs. We will never truly be safe until we've made certain Sauron is no more, their leader says in the series. That's not Tolkien. It's very un-Tolkien-esque, But safety is, Clavin says, by definition, not what the orcs want. They want power. That's very well put. And it reminds me again of a lecture that Lindsay gives where he says that traditional conservatives, whatever we want to use for that group, traditional conservatives don't want power except for when it's necessary to preserve the things that are most beautiful. Traditionally, he says. He says people on the, as we call it, the left, claim to want power for its own sake. In some ways, they want power for its own sake. Now, take that as it will. I tend to think that it's a little more complex than that, because I tend to think that it's a religious vision of remaking the world in our own image. And therefore, we need the power to do that, which is sort of I think, the catalyst for the whole attempts to infiltrate that the Fabians suggested. I've often asked, why does Sauron do what he does? What's his MO? Was he planning to pave all of Middle Earth? Is that his plan? I tend to think that the character Sauron is wanting the power in order to recreate the world in his own image. It's not just a destruction. It's not just I hate things and I want to destroy them all. He wants to remake Middle Earth in his own image, which is a slag heap, essentially.
Right. Yeah. Slag heap of darkness. And we see that going back to Morgoth. It's the same thing.
Yeah, Morgoth's the same way.
He's going to make Balrogs and dragons, and then Dragons 2.0 with wings. All of that stuff.
Which is really, going back to what you said, it's thinking of human beings and the whole world as a commodity to be used up until it's ashes.
Right. And in fact, that's exactly, and the most explicit, most tangible, and because it's the most believable illustration of that, because it'd be pretty hard to depict without actually destroying the whole world what it would look like. What is Sauron's sort of 5-year plan look like in action? Is that I cringe every time I hear business people talk about the 5-year plan. You invented that, right? Like Stalin. That's just, you sound like Stalin when you say that.
We need a T-shirt with the eye of Sauron. I have a 5-year plan.
I have a 5-year plan. It's okay. It fits into 5-year plan. But the Saruman and the Shah, we see what it looks like, the first stages of how Saruman would remake the world in his image. Because, Sauron is this dark, not quite chthonic force, but he's a dark demonic force.
Yes.
He's a dark demonic figure, and we just knew it would be really dark and bad. And like you said, a slag heap, and we get a vision a little bit of what his backyard looks like in the plains of Gorgoroth. But Saruman is an industrialist.
Yes.
He's gonna hype, he's all about this reconciliation of man and orc, right? He makes a hybrid race of orcs, of these man orc things that Uruk Hai. And he's an industrial. He's opening up trade with the. He's opening up the Shire to trade. He's
Oh,
modernizing them, bringing them into the modern global economy,
yeah, that's right. Get that
and
pipe
gutting
needle.
them, sucking them dry, gutting them, and then putting his Marines around, stationed in different places. Gosh,
Yeah.
that doesn't sound like a lot of countries I know.
Yeah. Right.
Anyway, we see what his vision of things is, and it's pretty awful, right? Tearing down the old mill and putting up a chemical processing plant in its place, cutting down the trees, the redistribution of wealth, the sharers industry, whatever, the gatherers and sharers, a lot of gathering, not a whole lot of sharing. And there's these ruffians and brigands going through, causing all this trouble. And we have a sense of what that looks like. And it is, he's trying to remake the world, or at least trying to remake here at the Shire in his own image. He wants it to be an industrial thing because he likes his, as Treebeard says, Saruman's mind is full of metal and gears.
Yeah, right. Metal and Gears. Yeah, and that whole destruction thing goes as far back as Orthanc, because Orthanc,
It was a beautiful palace at one point,
beautiful
beautiful
palace.
place.
Exactly. Yeah, and filled with trees and gardens before Saruman got underway, and of course he takes all those down and puts up instead these mills, these gears and fires and things like that, and pits. Um, and one of the big objections, there are a lot of objections I can make about the movie. It did what it did, and it was what it was. But one of the objections I have is that there's a scene where Saruman says to Gandalf that something to the effect of Sauron is going to win. You know it. You've seen it. That all-searing eye. You've seen that before, and you know in your heart that Sauron's going to win. And so the reason behind why Saruman does what he does in the movie is it's almost like he's afraid of what's going to happen, and so he decides to get on board. He decides to get on that wave before it overwhelms him. But in the book, I get more of a sense. In the original text, I get more of a sense that Saruman is not getting on board the Sauron train because he knows that's the destination. I think he really believes what Sauron suggests, the philosophy. He's drunk the Kool-Aid, so to speak. He's got a religious fervor for doing what Sauron is doing, even better than Sauron. He makes the Uruk-hai, for instance. He does trade with people and seduces them rather than conquer them. It's almost like Saruman thinks, oh, well, Sauron's work is good, but I'll do it even better because I'm more intelligent. I'm stronger. He doesn't come across as some demonic nutbag when you hear him talk in the novels. But I've always wondered what was his MO? What was he trying to achieve? I think it's very much connected to this Fabian idea that we're going to reshape the world in our own image.
Well, that's exactly the conversation. That's exactly the conversation Saruman has with Gandalf when he invites Gandalf over for tea the first time, and says, "Come on, these people need to be governed. We'll still be doing the same objective we were sent here to do. Just pivoting our strategy a little bit. We don't resist Sauron right away. Maybe we retreat a little bit. We build up, we get to become his close counselors, and then we could overthrow Sauron, and then we could have the power and then direct things in the right way. Let's act prudently, Gandalf." I don't know. It seems like he's just kind of, spark noting the strategy, the playbook that you just explained about the Fabian Society.
Yeah, no, he really does. I'm even down to the eugenics thing because there is the breeding of Uruk-hai. I mean, we question, well, how do you do that? I honestly think that you're not supposed to look too deep. Obviously,
you're not supposed to think about it.
No,
but you just know that it's awful.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think that if I were to depict it, I would depict it as a lab that we are breeding Uruk-hai not by conjugal bliss. We are breeding Uruk-hai by taking cells and putting them together.
Yeah, putting the pink slime through the pipes.
Exactly. An almost Mary Shelley kind of thing, of cadavers. A better stronger race that actually can interface with our technology, right?
Bingo.
And have a
Singularity, my friend, singularity.
the singularity. That's right. Saruman achieves the singularity. Good Lord.
You know, that's an interesting thing too, is about the gutting of heritage and self-identity of who you are. Is what is Edoras, the Golden Hall? What a barn where brigands drink and their brats roll in the reek.
I love that. That's great.
I mean, that's exactly it, though. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what these people here have been told, that their heritage up until football, soccer, became the thing, and up until whatever coming thing around the corner, we're trying to get you people, and you just can't get up to where it needs to be.
I know.
And then that's what a lot of Americans are being told. This is all you personally have ever been, which I think is very, just to if I can tangent a little bit back to that initial point, I think is particularly insidious because it's designed, I think, precisely to prevent the people living in America from distinguishing themselves from the great Satan of the government, the state apparatus that is the terrorist organization that it is. If you just lump it all together, all y'all Americans, America is this way. You're like, well, that's me. I'm American. I'm an American. So I must be this way. And then you either reject it or you don't reject it. But it's like, but there's no distinction. Hey, wait a minute. I'm actually not the same as that thing over there. In fact, maybe we should get rid of that thing over there, right? Because that's what happens if you start to realize you're distinct from the thing that actually is the bad guy. Then you want to overthrow it. But if the identity narrative can be continued to be woven in such a way, to be woven in such a way that you don't see the difference between you and the identity, or that other entity, I should say, that you have one continuous identity, well, then you would never overthrow it because it's part of who we are, and you either love it or you hate it. Or then what do you do because you don't have an identity? And when you don't have an identity, as Hannah Arendt points out very clearly, you're ripe victim of totalitarianism.
Exactly. They're like three responses to this whole psyop, if you will. Two contra and one for. I mean, the one for is basically just you just accept it, or you join with it. And you just take that. That's what we are. But the two contras, one is despair, as you said, and one is violence. So you either despair, you're like, gee, I guess I'm just somebody who can't say the words and you just hang your head, let the whole thing happen to you. Or you become violent, and then you're also in trouble because then, you become like Denethor, this sort of brooding, everybody's my enemy kind of thing. And so those three responses are all not good responses. The response one has to have, in my opinion, has to be another route, something, a positive reaffirmation, if you will, or revivification, if you will, of what is good and true. And then a staunch refusal to accept the lie that's being fed to you. So, like, for instance, in my case, I refuse to accept the lie that America is rapists and pillagers, that is all we are. I refuse to accept it. But at the same time, I know that I have to work to some degree to revive what is good and true and noble about not just America, but human culture in general. Recognize that America has made great contributions, but then Italy has made great contributions. England, France, all of them have wonderful aspects to them that need to be revived.
Absolutely. That doesn't mean you have to be a fascist to do it.
No, because fascists, see, the thing about fascism, in my opinion, is that fascism is a hollow zombie form of human culture.
Well, absolutely. And that's the thing. The fascists weren't right wing. They weren't conservatives, if you will. I mean, they weren't the traditional right wing. If you think in terms of the original French Parliament, right, left wing, right wing for the monarchy, left wing, radical Jacobins. Right. No, they wanted to do away with the monarchy, right? I mean, Mussolini came to power as literally as a wolf in sheep's clothing. His plan was to get rid of the monarch. Monarch is obsolete, but he's useful for now. The king is a useful idiot for us to take power. king went along with it. He was an idiot. He was a useful idiot. And you know, but the goal that, you know, they were not at all nostalgic for a glorious past. They had this re-mythologized vision of what a, you know, somehow a zombie, and it is a zombie revival of ancient Rome, pagan, pre-Christian. Got to get rid of Christianity.
Yeah,
Got to
right.
get rid of traditional society. Got to get rid of traditional religion,
Yep.
and remake a new vision of what Rome was. To the degree that Mussolini also built like a new city, and most people don't know this. He built a new city outside of Rome to be like a new version of Rome, a better steel and concrete version of Rome, called it Eur.
Yep.
And it's just this bizarre
It's
place.
ugly.
But like that's the new one.
Same thing with the Germans. Germans were designing Germania. You know,
Yeah,
Germania
yeah.
be the center. And I'm fascinated with the character of Dietrich Bonhoeffer because what the Germans did was they gutted religion. They
Yeah.
created a whole new religion, which was the Germanic Christianity, and it was in direct opposition to both the Lutherans as well as the Catholics and other.
Yep. It was to create a religion of the new state, and that's
Yep.
exactly Mussolini, religion of the new state. I mean, like in a more explicitly occultish sort of way, occultic sort of way. The original, you know, takeovers of Italy back, you know, whatever, 80 years earlier than that, well, 70 years, whatever, in the 1860s, their vision was to create a religion of the nation state, very, very clearly, you know, explicitly. But the occultism was like, well, we still keep that, well, occulted, we still keep it under wraps, right? It's still secret. Secret societies are secret societies. Whereas the time you get in the 1930s and 40s, it's more open conspiracy, if you will. The idea is, no, it's going to be dark and satanic, and that's how we like it. And you're going to get on board with that because we're going to goose step our way into your village.
Right.
Whether that's Mussolini's black shirts or Hitler's Boy Scouts on steroids, that's the basic plan, right? Is they're just being more brazen about it than. And society, I suppose a person would say, well, yes, but society wasn't ready for it then. They overstepped. This is how I can see, like, if you were to think about how they might think about it today, they would say, well, yes, that was bad. They overstepped, pushed too hard, too strong, too soon. Now we're more enlightened, 100 years on. We can do things out of Silicon Valley instead, and we can craft a network where people will be just begging to be a part of this. We're not pushing anything on them. We're letting them opt in themselves.
And they will accept the products that we give them to eat and drink, and they will accept the vaccines that we put in their arms, and they will accept being medicated for the rest of their lives, and they will accept the fact that government really doesn't represent the people at all, and they will accept the entertainment that we foist on them, and they will accept the fact that they have to be shut inside of their houses lest they come out and be shot with paint guns.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
because this is all for your good, and
it's
eventually if you just let us get far enough, we'll be able to give you free energy,
and then we can make that 5-minute city or whatever it is.
right? Because ultimately our motto is to serve man. It's a cookbook.
I do hope the young people listening, if they're listening, get that reference. That's a great reference. Yes, to serve man.
Look that up, kids.
It's right up to where we want to be, which is a discussion of Maeglin and Arthel and all that. So, but we've run out of time, so let's do that.
Right.
What a joy to talk to you. All right.
Good chatting with you too, Mr. Lassiter.
I think I'm going to go and shoot zombies or something, you know?
It's a good idea.
Yeah, I think so too. Thanks so much, Doctor. We'll talk to you in a bit, okay?
All right. Good talking to you. Take care.